Folks, welcome to our webinar for May 2025. My name is Rob Whittle. I'm an aviation safety advisor based in the CASA office in Brisbane. This webinar today is on ramp checks, and it's where we'll explain what these ramp checks are, what is covered during them, and most importantly, they're not something to be feared. As per previous webinars, this one will be recorded. We have turned off your microphones and cameras to save on bandwidth though. Along with the previous webinars, this webinar will be available on the CASA website under the Pilot Safety Hub sections of flight planning, controlled aerodromes and operations, and non-controlled aerodromes. It will also be on the CASA YouTube channel as well. At the end of the seminar, we will have a short Q&A time following the presentation, during which you'll be able to ask any questions you might have and have them answered. And of course, there's nothing to stop you at all to putting your questions in the chat function, and we will endeavour to have them answered for you. Now, joining me today on this webinar is our Flight Operations Inspector, Melanie Waddell from the Victorian office. So I'd like to extend a welcome to Melanie and invite Melanie to just jump on and tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to go through the entire history, but I started back in CASA in about 2010. So specifically with respect to ramp inspections, my training started with the initial training on how to conduct a ramp inspection, and that's specifically for VH registered aircraft in Australia. But in 2015, I left CASA and went to work in Europe as a flight operations inspector. And there I was trained as a SAFA inspector. So SAFA is the State Assessment of Foreign Aircraft. This forms in line with the ICAO Annex 6, and all contracting states are required to carry out assessment of foreign aircraft entering their country. So Australia and Europe and many other countries who are contracting states to ICAO carry these inspections out. The training for the SAFA inspector was carried out in Amsterdam. We spent 4.5 days going through theory and doing a practical inspection. And then once that ground component was carried out, we had to do a series of OJT. So my on-the-job training was carried out in Rome and Milan, where there was a series of between 20 and 30 ramp inspections that I observed and carried out over a 2-week period. Then when I went back to the country I was working in, I did another series of probably about a dozen inspections where I was observed before I was signed off and issued a warrant for the country that I worked for to carry out those assessments.
Certainly get to travel the world, that's for sure, Mel. Thanks very much for joining us on today's webinar, and also the knowledge that you'll certainly pass on to all of us today. As per previous webinars, those that have been on previous webinars, we've still partnered with Credley and use these digital badges in your email signatures, digital resumes, and on social medias. In fact, some of you may have already been using these ones or may have seen these badges on LinkedIn, etc. To be eligible for these badges, you need to stay for the duration of the webinar, and you'll receive an email from Credley at the end to claim your badge. What we are covering today is having a look at the purpose of a ramp check, what is actually covered in a ramp check, and importantly, I guess too, for everybody's knowledge going forward, is what are the common findings that are found in a ramp check. Now, ramp checks, I guess, it is subject to a lot of innuendo, and I guess in some respects, maybe a little bit of fear by pilots that have been selected for a ramp check if you haven't undergone that process before. It's important that if you are doing things by the book, a ramp check should not prove to be any concern. But we're all human, of course, and you can sometimes overlook things. If it has been a while since you've had anything to do with CASA, just ask yourself, have I become complacent? Am I flying and planning to fly by the rules? Even asking yourself if you've renewed the registration of your personal locator beacon, it is important. This webinar will explore what is checked during a ramp check, and what I said before is what are some of the common findings that are found by the inspectors. So I guess starting, Melanie, what is the actual purpose of a ramp check?
A ramp check, which is also known as a ramp inspection, is primarily carried out as a safety measure. So what we aim to do is check that the pilots or crew and the aircraft that they're flying are fit for flight, they're airworthy, and they conform to whatever the current regulations are for the operations that they're being carried out for. So really, it's a proactive way of ensuring that the compliance, safety and standards meet what we're expecting them to be in the aviation sector.
Great. And the rules, of course, they're there for everyone's safety, aren't they? They're not just there for an inspector to use to do ramp checks, but you're just checking on the general safety of the aircraft and the crew, of course.
Exactly. So we sometimes do those as part of our surveillance events. If we're out doing an audit, we might do an inspection of an aircraft. But also we could do it, we might go out for a day to an aerodrome and just ramp whatever aircraft happen to be visiting for the day, or we might go out to an air show. And it doesn't matter what period you're flying for. We'll look at any aircraft that are coming in or going out for the day that happen to be there when we're at the airport.
Cool. Thank you for that. Now, there is an age-old phrase out there, proper planning prevents poor performance, and this also rings true for ramp checks. Ramp checks are just checking what you as the pilot in command should be checking prior to each and every flight, and that includes the carriage of documents. With ramp checks, there's certainly no secrets to them, nothing there to try and catch you out. Now, through Melanie, we'll now see exactly what is inspected during a ramp check. So, Melanie, what do you actually check for?
We do have quite a long list, but generally we aim to take not more than half an hour for a ramp check. Some of them might be shorter and some of them might be longer. So we do our best not to hold up a flight, but we do aim to get through the checklist if we can. And quite often you'll see two inspectors, and that'll usually be made up of a flight operations inspector and an airworthiness inspector. So the checklist is broken up into 5 different parts, and what we'll have a look at is the flight deck, the cabin, the external condition of the aircraft and the cargo, and then just anything in general that might be related to the flight that doesn't fit into one of those.
Great. And I guess with the flight deck too, that includes the documentation that needs to be carried on the flight as well, and like
Absolutely.
flight crew licenses and medicals and that type of thing.
Yes, yeah, definitely we'll have a look through those. So if you like, we might sort of go through to the next slides and have a look in a little bit more detail at what we have a look at. So starting with the flight deck, we'll have a look at the general condition, and what we mean by general condition includes things such as the windscreen. So windscreen is something that you're meant to check as part of your daily inspection. That's clear and clean, free from damage, and you have an unobstructed view. And it also includes things like the cockpit or flight deck area being clear of anything, any loose items that might become projectiles during the flight. We also look at the flight control conditions, including any control locks, if there are any, the emergency exits, the placards and instrument markings. We'll have a look at the instrument panel, see what's inoperative, and if it is inoperative, that it's in the maintenance release or technical log, depending on what you happen to be using. And then we'll have a look at the cockpit seating and restraints. So really what we look at depends on the type of operation and what you're expected to have in the flight deck, as well as the condition. In terms of documentation, we look at everything that you can see listed there on the slide. In terms of the aircraft flight manual and pilot operating handbook, generally what we'll do is we'll check the manufacturer's website to see what the latest version is meant to be, and then we'll check that you have the latest version on the aircraft. For nav equipment instructions, that might be things such as the GPS, that you've got instructions for the equipment that you're utilizing in the aircraft. The radio and navigation charts, that they're in date, and of course that you've got them present, but what's relevant to the flight that you're carrying out. weather NOTAMs, weight and balance performance charts, any of the things that are normally required. And if required, and you have passengers for an air transport, we'd be looking for the passenger lists.
Sorry, Mel, just to interrupt you there. Sorry, just on the previous slide, if we could just pop back to that one.
Absolutely.
There's MEL if required, so minimum equipment list. Can you just expand on that one for us a little bit?
Absolutely. So the MEL is a minimum equipment list. This is something that many private pilots flying smaller aircraft may never see, but operators, particularly if they're flying IFR and if the aircraft type that they're flying has a master minimum equipment list, then they may be required to have one for flight. What this document is it provides the operator with some relief by outlining what equipment can be unserviceable. So if something's not working or defective, you can have a look in this document and see for what period and under what conditions can you operate without that piece of equipment. Now, the MEL is considered, the master is what's considered as a minimum for the aircraft type, and it's made up for a number of models. So when an operator develops their MEL, they need to consider the rules of the country that they're operating in, as well as what the manufacturer has said is the minimum. And they also need to consider the type of operations that they're conducting. So the MEL becomes customized to the aircraft that they're flying. So you might have one MEL per type, but if you're operating different models, you have a choice of either doing a separate one per model or combining it, but the differences need to be clear to the pilot flying so that they understand what the requirements are for the specific model or the specific operation. In addition to that, you will find maintenance and operations procedures. So if there is a maintenance procedure associated, this is what's expected to be carried out to operate with that inoperative equipment. And operations procedures might be stipulated in the MEL or it might be in an operator's operations manual. And for that reason, you can't, if you're, let's say, cross-hiring an aircraft, use somebody else's MEL for your operation. It's a document that's approved by CASA for the operator.
Just operator specific. Beauty.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thanks for that.
That's okay. So then safety equipment and flight crew. As you said before, we look at flight crew licenses and medicals. But equipment, we'll be looking at things such as hand fire extinguishers, ELTs, life jackets, life rafts. All depends whether or not they're required to have them on board for the type of operation that they're doing. And we'll also look at the quantity, which tends to vary from part to part. So what you need as a private pilot holder might be different to what you need as a 133 or a 135 or a 121 operator. And likewise with the aerial work operations. In the cabin, again, we'll check the condition and equipment. There's a list there, basically all the things that we'll check. Things like oxygen masks, that's if it's required for the aircraft, if you've got a pressurized aircraft, and depending on the height that you're flying at. If you're doing aerial work, we might have a look at some roll equipment depending on what function you're carrying out for this flight. So usually we'll ask questions, what type of operation you're doing, so that we can better assess in accordance with what you're doing for that day. The external condition is ordinarily done by an airworthiness inspector, but it might be done by a flight inspector if you don't have one present, if you don't have an airworthiness inspector present. Again, they will check the general condition, look for anything that's loose, broken, cracked. We look at the placards both internally and externally to see what's required. The way we know whether it's required or not required is Section 2 of the AFM or the Pilot Operating Handbook. Placards is normally at the very end of that section. So we'll match up what the AFM says with what the aircraft has. Again, the different parts, propellers, doors, hatches, engines, we'll have a look at the condition if there's any leaks. And it's not going to be the same for every aircraft. It will depend. So generally, if we find something, if we find cracks, drill holes, wear and tear, it all depends on what's in the aircraft maintenance manual as to whether it's within acceptable limits. So it's not a matter of we find a crack and then that means that the aircraft's grounded. We do need to check from aircraft to aircraft. Now, the baggage compartment's another area that we'll check. Again, we'll have a look at placarding, the general condition of that area, if dangerous goods are being carried, where it's located, and the security of the cargo.
When you're looking at the security of the cargo, are you looking to see that all the cargo is obviously tied down or secured in a way, but is there any markings, I guess, or any limitations of, say, packing heights of cargo, that type of stuff that you look at?
Yeah, that changes from type to type, but the most common placards you'll see in the baggage area is a maximum weight. So for example, load no more than 50 pound in this section or 250 kilograms. Depending on the various parts or areas of your aircraft, those loads will differ. And there might also be a floor loading limitation. But often you'll see placards which will say do not fill beyond this height. So we would check that whatever's been loaded does not go past the limit that has been placarded within the cabin. That's not for all aircraft, but some, and very common with cargo aircraft.
Great, thanks. It certainly highlights that you do need to be competent in your aircraft and the aircraft systems and really know your aircraft, how you're loading it as well as how you're flying it.
Yep, it is. And we don't all know everything, sorry. So we'll usually ask you a bit of information because the number of aircraft types that we're looking at is quite broad. There's a lot of aircraft types around the world and we haven't flown all of them. So we'll check with engineers, we'll check with yourself, the companies. It's just because we find something and ask questions doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an issue. It's more inquiring to find out if it is within limits and up to standards. Now, I'm going to share with you the top findings around the world. So the top 4 offenders are flight planning, charts, defects, and cabin safety. For flight planning, particularly with IFR planning, one of the most common findings around the world is that when they've done the flight plan, they've basically just done a direct to location A to location B, and they haven't taken into consideration the SIDS and stars. So that's quite important. What is also important is if ERSA has or NOTAMs have stipulated extra time for fuel, it's important that you got enough fuel for the flight, so you can't just plan distance A to B and carry fuel for that. Charts, biggest issue is either out of date or not carrying them in some cases. For defects, either we find defects which haven't been recorded on the maintenance release, or there are defects that have been recorded but not yet assessed as to whether they're okay to fly with or not okay. And cabin safety, probably the findings are more at the larger end, and one of the biggest problems is the briefing that's been provided to people seated in the emergency exits. Common observations that we would find in private and recreational type flights, so those operating under Part 91, placards, which I spoke about before, that you'll find what's required generally in Section 2 of your AFM or Pilot Operating Handbook. Either they're missing in some cases or they've been damaged to a point that you can't actually read what the placard's meant to say. Compass correction cards, either they're missing or they've gone past the date for when another compass swing is required. Seatbelts being frayed is very common. Out-of-date GPS software, and the maintenance release tends to be quite common. There's a lot of issues with the maintenance release, apart from not recording defects, but the pilots sometimes don't actually know what they're signing for when they sign that. Addition of hours is often a problem, and we might go through a little bit of the maintenance releases as we go on today, so that I can further explain that if you don't mind. But
That'd be
unsecured cargo is another big finding in Australia. So the maintenance release, you'll see here in the middle, and I might just, can you see where my pointer is pointing? Yep.
I can, yes.
Yeah, you can see it
hopefully
says,
the audience can too.
Okay, it says, oh, yep, good.
Great.
So the aircraft is being maintained in accordance with CASA System of Maintenance Schedule 5. I think most people online today, that is the system of maintenance that their aircraft is being maintained to. So the daily inspection needs to be carried out in accordance with CASA's Schedule 5, which you find in the Part 1988 Civil Aviation Regulations. So when you sign in Part 3, what you're saying is that you've conducted the inspection according to the list in the Part 1988 regs. So make sure you have a look at Schedule 5 and you understand what that means. So the other thing that people don't understand is that a daily inspection is maintenance. So you're certifying that you've completed that maintenance. And it needs to be certified by an authorized person. So as a pilot, if you have a valid license, then you can sign for the daily inspection. And it needs to be, as I said before, carried out in accordance with approved data. So for those of you operating on CASA Schedule 5 system of maintenance, look for the CARs, but there is another two types of systems of maintenance. One is the manufacturers, and the other is one that's been specifically approved by CASA for the operator. So what you need to do is always check that maintenance release to know which of the three you're carrying out in accordance with, because you might work for an operator who has a number of aircraft all on different types of schedules of maintenance. Now, if we move on to AOC holders and aerial work operators, common observations that we have there is flights commencing with outstanding maintenance, or the maintenance may not be due, but they might be going out for a 3-hour flight and the maintenance is due in 1 hour. So that's a common finding. We do find a number of pilots conducting 50 hourly inspections on Robertson helicopters without a CAR 42 ZZ6 approval. Aircraft flight manuals that are not current, and weight and balance either not being carried out or calculated, or calculations have been done without utilising an approved system. For area work and AOC holders, they would probably be the main four.
Just broadly, just broad overview, I guess. What is that CAR 42 ZC6 approval?
Okay, the 42ZC is a regulation which outlines the maintenance, not so much the maintenance, but who can carry out the maintenance and under what circumstances. So if you have a look in the regulations, you'll see, in addition to the 42ZC, it makes reference to Schedule 8 and to Schedule 5. Schedule 8 of the 1988 CASA outlines maintenance that can carried out on a Class B aircraft under 42ZC, specifically subsection 4. This includes the holder of a pilot license, and again, like I said before, your license has to be valid for the aircraft that you're flying. And one of the items that it lists that you can do in Schedule 8 is a daily inspection. So then if you want to find out what's included in the daily inspection, you would go to Schedule 5 of the 1988 CAS.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, I'm going to hand back over to you for ADSB.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Just waiting for the technology to catch up with my button pushing. So thank you very much, Mel, for all of that. And I guess it's important to note too, everything that we've gone through there is exactly what you do on a ramp check, isn't it? There's no tricks or stuff that's hidden that from the pilots that are undergoing these ramp checks, apart from what we've discussed. All right, just a quick reminder, folks, that look, the ADSB rebate is still current. And while round 1 of the ADSB was aimed at VFR pilots, round 2 has been opened up to IFR pilots as well, or operators looking to install ADSB in equipment. To be eligible to apply for the 50% rebate, and you obviously need to purchase it, and installation of the ADSB device up until the 31st of May 2027. So certainly if you're thinking about purchasing an ADSB type or electronic conspicuity device for a VH registered aircraft, you can certainly avail yourself of the 50% government rebate. Further information, of course, is found on the CASA website. So, folks, that wraps up our seminar that we have, or the webinar that we have for today on ramp checks. Thank you very much for joining us online, and a special thanks too for Mel for her valuable information that she passed on to us today. And I trust that everyone has learned something new for that. Now, some people have placed some questions in the chat. I'll just have a quick look through. Steve asked a question. Mel,
I think I've answered that the last. Oh, so if it's only VFR, then no, it's if you're traveling IFR and you're using it for your primary navigation, then you need it up to date.
Yep.
But if you're just using it to supplement your VFR, it doesn't have to be up to date.
Great.
Now, Dov has asked, what's the consequences of failing a ramp check? It's not a matter of passing or failing. What we'll do is we'll have a look at what the issue is. So I'm not sure if you asked this before, Rob, and I was busy looking at the questions, so I didn't hear you. But one of the ramp inspections that I've done, where I found drill holes in the cowling, and you often see drill holes in an aircraft to stop cracks from propagating. But the question that we asked when we saw it was, because there was, I think maybe half a dozen drill holes, we asked how many is too much. So what then happens when both of us don't actually know the answer is the operator goes back to either the engineer or to the manufacturer to see what the limits are. So the consequence there was that the operator grounded the aircraft themselves, and because they wrote it on the maintenance release and the aircraft wasn't flying until it had what needed to be done, we didn't really need to do anything more. But when we go to the air show, occasionally we'll do a number of ramp inspections, and at the time we'll take note of what's wrong, and we won't decide what to do until we get back to the office. So if we find a lot of people that haven't been carrying their license, we might send out an educational letter to those pilots. It all depends what it is. But if it means that the aircraft's not in an airworthy state, then either the person flying needs to enter it into the maintenance release and ensure that it's not flown if it can't be, or we might have to put together an aircraft survey report which will place conditions that you won't be flying the aircraft until whatever those conditions are met.
Great. Also, another, I suppose, question that people may be thinking but not quite asking is when they are undergoing a ramp check and they have the flight operations inspector with them, airworthiness inspector with them as well, can the pilots ask questions of you and have a
Absolutely.
talk to you about stuff that they may not be familiar with, or to broaden their knowledge as well?
Generally, we're happy to have a discussion, even if it's not related to the ramp inspection. Obviously, if we're doing a ramp inspection, we need to get that done, but we'll always make time, if we can, to have a discussion on other topics as well. And if it's something that we don't know the answer to, we'll take the question away and get back to you, get your contact details, and get back to you with a response.
Yeah, it's good to know that you can interact with the inspectors there and feel free to have your conversations and to ask questions of them as well, or something that you may not be familiar with. That's really good to know. With our, I guess, the advent of digital technology too, just ensuring that you have your pilot license even in a digital form and readily available. How does that work with the inspectors when you do have a digital license? How can that be checked?
Well, if they have a copy of that, we can always double check back in the office that it matches what we saw. So it's relatively simple to check.
Really easy to check, yeah. If you've got the electronic copy, is there a need to have a physical copy with you?
I would need to double check that. I can't remember because I've got a few different regs floating around in my head from the different countries. I'll take that one on notice and just come back to that one.
No problems at all.
There's one there on the Jabiru aircraft,
Yes,
whether that needs to carry a fire extinguisher. I'm not sure because that doesn't fall under our Part 91 regulations, so that one we'll have to take on notice as well and get back to you on. And then do the records on an EFB satisfy flight log, weight and balance, etc.? Yes, they can. But if you're working for an operator, that all depends what the operator has documented in their operations manual.
It's a good question that that Daniel has asked there. Given the time pressures most commercial pilots are under to meet schedules, departure, arrival times, etc., what sort of delays are acceptable to comply with a ramp check before the pilot can request to stop the check and depart for their flight?
Pilot can always request at any time if they have a time pressure. The inspector will usually, I mean, even if we're looking at an international aircraft, we aim not to take any more than half an hour. So generally we'll have a look at their turnaround times, and what we can do is start an inspection, and if we don't finish, we might choose to finish off that inspection at another time. It'll usually work by communication between the inspector and the pilot to sort of see what the issue is and how much of an issue a delay is going to cause.
Yeah, it certainly all hinges on communication, doesn't it? And the main goal, I guess, too, when ramp checks are carried out, is that you don't want to unduly delay the aircraft at all.
Yeah,
You want
absolutely.
to do those checks in a timely manner, of course, but also not interrupting schedules, time pressures, flight and duty times, that type of thing. So yeah, really good.
Yeah. Now, Jared's asked, would flight duration be taken into account when assessing items like windscreen cleanliness during a ramp inspection? It it's probably not a huge factor, because unless you've been through a dust storm or hit insects, you can sort of tell the difference between ones that have been caked on for a long time and haven't been cleaned to ones that are sort of fairly fresh. So it is taken into consideration, but just remember that keeping your windscreen clear is part of the daily inspection, and you are certifying that you have done that. So make sure that you do. But I would do that as part of a pre-flight as well as part of the daily inspection.
Yeah. There's one question that's a really good question, actually, is what happens when you discover a non-compliance that requires you to stop or delay a flight? So everything, majority would go smoothly, but yeah, what happens when you do find something that is non-compliant?
Okay, again, it depends what it is. We have to assess whether it's a breach. So let's say it's something that makes the aircraft not airworthy, the aircraft can't go. So usually there's a choice. You enter it onto the maintenance release yourself and you stop it of your own accord, or if you don't do that, then we might have to issue an aircraft survey report, and that's usually done by the airworthiness inspector.
Right, and that'll be follow due process and go out, etc. Yep.
Exactly.
All right, folks. Just looking at the time, we've almost taken up the entirety of the time allowed for this particular webinar. So I'd just like to wrap it up and just say thank you very much again for joining us online. And again, a big shout out to Mel for your valuable information today, and certainly answering the questions that have popped up in the chat as well. I trust everyone that has joined us for today's webinar has learned something new or demystified a bit of ramp checks for you. And this recording will be available shortly on the CASA Pilot Safety Hub under the sections of flight planning, controlled aerodromes and operations, and non-controlled aerodromes. Our next webinar will actually be in a couple of weeks' time, actually, and the topic of that one will be unstable approaches. So please keep an eye out for when that one is actually advertised, and I'll certainly invite you all, if you can, to join us for that particular webinar too. Importantly, don't forget to check your emails for one from Credley and log on to the site to receive your Credley badge. Thanks again for joining us, folks, and goodbye and have a safe day.